This is a step-by-step sew-along tutorial to sew a puff sleeve to attach to a dress or a top. In this video, I'm showing it attached to the Riviera dress by Maiden Mary Designs, and you can get the puff sleeve pattern piece for free at maidenmarydesigns.com. Here I'm making the drawstring for the bows on the sleeve, which is optional. If you prefer to do the elastic finish at the bottom, you can skip the drawstring steps and the buttonholes and skip to creating the casing and then inserting the elastic. Here I'm using a bias tape maker to create a fold for my drawstring. If you're doing this, you will want the right side of the fabric facing down. Alternatively, you can fold this long narrow piece in half and then sew a seam and turn it right side out. After pressing the drawstring using the bias tape maker, fold in half again the narrow long way and press all the way across, and then pin or use quilting clips to hold the fold in place. Next, to finish the raw ends of the drawstring, we're going to fold it in and then refold the sides again and press to give a good clean finish. You can clip or pin it, and then we'll bring it over to the sewing machine. To avoid the string getting pulled down into the base of the sewing machine, I start down a little bit and back stitch to the end, and then rotate the fabric around the needle and sew the really skinny little end of the drawstring to finish it, and then bring it back to the corner and continue sewing down all the way to the opposite end of the drawstring and finish the other end the same way. Lay your sleeve flat with the right side facing down, and we're going to pre-press the hem first at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch all the way across, ironing it, and then the second fold will be at 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Unfold the hem, then fold the sleeve in half to mark the center point. We're going to sew a buttonhole on either side of that center point. I made my buttonhole a tiny bit smaller than 1 centimeter so that it fits my drawstring, and we're going to sew the buttonholes right above the edge of the upper fold. Follow the instructions for your machine to sew an automatic buttonhole using the buttonhole foot. Then snip the tails of the thread, move your fabric over, and sew the second buttonhole. Before cutting the holes open, I like to place a pin on either end of the buttons just to be sure that when I use my seam ripper to open up the center, I don't cut through the tacking stitches at either end, and it protects the stitches. I did a quick serge at the hem of my sleeve because it was fraying a lot. Here we're going to fold the sleeve in half with the right sides together. Be sure that those folds align on the side, and then sew with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Finish the edge with a serger or a zigzag stitch. Press the seams to the side, mirroring each other on the two sleeves. Then fold up the hem at the same marks you had them before. We're going to press them again to make sure that those channels are nice and crisp. Then pin or clip the channel in place all the way around the sleeve. Edge stitch the channel in place around the sleeve, stitching as close as you can to the fold. If you are making your sleeve for a drawstring with a bow, you're going to sew all the way around and back tack at the end. If you're sewing for an elastic channel, be sure to leave a small opening so that you can feed the elastic through the channel, and then afterward finish by closing that channel. Turn your garment to the side and lay it flat. Align the seam of the sleeve with the underarm side seam of your garment. Pin it in place with the seam allowance of 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, and make sure that the seams visually align from the outside of the garment. Then pin the sleeve in place only at the underarm, laying flat, and sew it in place with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Sew around the remainder of the puff sleeve only using a longer stitch and a higher tension setting on your machine. We're going to sew a gathering stitch all the way around this single piece of fabric until we reach the garment. Leave a long tail of thread and do not backstitch on either end. Here I'm sewing a second row of gathering stitches just to ensure for an even gather around the entire sleeve. Be sure to keep these gathering stitches within the 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance so it's not seen from the outside of the sleeve. Pulling on the bobbin thread, slide the fabric across the thread, gathering the top of the sleeve. We'll continue pulling and gathering the sleeve until it fits the armhole or the strap of our garment. Check to see that the sleeve fits the shape and length of your armhole. I'm continuing to spread out and adjust the distribution of my gathers to make sure that they are even and looking uniform, and then I'm pinning it to the strap of my dress. Pin the sleeve all the way around the armhole, then sew in place with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget to switch the settings on your machine for the stitch length and the tension back to the standard settings. I'm sewing my sleeve in place with the gathered side of the sleeve facing up so that I can see it and I can adjust the gathers as they're going underneath the presser foot and making sure I like how it looks all the way around the sleeve. Afterward, finish the raw edges on a serger or with a zigzag stitch. Use a safety pin on one end of the drawstring to feed it through the buttonhole and shimmy it around the channel of the sleeve until it reaches the opposite end and goes through the second buttonhole. Remove the safety pin and then pull the drawstrings until they're at a comfortable spot and tie a pretty bow and your sleeve is ready to wear. If you share your creation on Instagram, tag at Maiden Mary Designs. I would love to see what you've made.